Hi guys, before starting today's video, check out the link below. It's for Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. So they're doing a horror series, an animated horror series that has many YouTubers, including Markiplier. It's going to be a big thing. They raised over $7,000 right now, and they're starting a Kickstarter campaign. So you guys can go and support. It'd be really great. And I don't know, maybe if they want me, I can be part of the show as well. So I guess comment on their YouTube channel saying you guys want Horror Studio on to be part of the project if you want. Anyways, without further ado, grab a blanket, turn off your lights for 4 true scary stories of different creatures. Beautiful Mermaid. This story happened to my grandmother and her older brother when they were teenagers. When I first heard this story, it sounded far-fetched compared to the usual paranormal stories told. But my grandma and her brother claim it to be true even till death. My grandmother was a strict school teacher, and she still stuck to her story, along with her older brother as the witness. My grandmother was the youngest of 5 siblings, and at the time, she and her family had owned property somewhere in the Philippines. Her family had grown various vegetables in a space next to a lake and mountain. According to my grandmother, the lake was located in such a strange area. It was a small-sized lake, the size of a backyard pool. It kind of went around the mountain, if you can imagine a crescent-shaped lake. Small streams of water dripped down from the mountain onto the lake as water flowed from the lake to a small stream going to a nearby river. A very beautiful and serene place of nature, as you would imagine. The crops were planted near the lake due to the soil being fertile and soft. It was also a good place to wash their crops and other things. On a certain day, my grandmother and her brother were tasked to harvest some crops. The daylight was darkened by clouds, and it was slightly drizzling outside. They were told that the crops would be easier to pick out on that day since the soil was soft. They had to do it quickly before the drizzling transitioned into actual rain. My grandmother and her brother began collecting crops and washing them at the lake. They were both confused as the lake water began going crazy from swaying and rising up and down as if there was a typhoon present. My grandmother then spotted a woman sitting across from them on an elevated rock to the side. From behind, the woman had long dark wet hair going down her bare back. Like in a fairy tale, she had fish-like scales from around her hips to what seemed like a tail. Half of the tail was submerged in the lake as she was sitting. The woman sitting was said to look like a beautiful young woman from behind, if that makes any sense. My grandmother nudged her older brother to check out what she was witnessing. This was really strange, because no one was around the area when they arrived to pick out the crops. This woman just suddenly appeared, and both siblings didn't see anything or hear anything move around them as they were working. Once her brother laid eyes on the mysterious woman, he dropped what he had and sprinted away from the lake screaming. My grandmother was still looking at the woman and seconds later turned to see that her own brother left her there screaming like a maniac. My grandmother quickly shifted her own gaze from her brother to the woman. The woman's head was turned as if she was alerted from all the noise. The woman still sat, turning her head to look at my grandmother. The face of this woman was burned into my grandmother's memory. My grandmother always capitalized on this part of the story when describing the woman's face. The woman's forehead was huge and bulky, and her eyes looked like 2 slits made with a knife, devoid of eyelashes and folds. Her nose was unnaturally flat, making it look like she had no nasal bone at all. The lips were thick, if they were even lips, and looked like as if it was blending in with the gums. The mouth housed small needle-like teeth. Note that this creature wasn't that far from my grandmother, but far enough to see the features on the woman's face. My grandmother was shocked and felt as if the air escaped her lungs from looking at this woman's face. The actual seconds felt longer before she began chasing after her brother, screaming as well. My grandmother ran without looking back to see if that thing was chasing her at all. Now, according to both my grandmother and her brother, the animalistic screech was heard from the lake as they were a fair distance away. She caught up with her brother and they both met up with 2 other siblings that were heading towards the lake. She practically told her whole family, and surprisingly, everyone didn't denounce what she saw on that day. The older family members even told them that they were lucky to escape, and what they encountered could have been an evil spirit. My mother and her side of the family are prone to paranormal phenomenon, including my older brother as well, but this story was different and more visual from the occasional ghost sightings. They couldn't determine whether the lake woman was a creature or some type of evil spirit. My grandmother and her brother would tell the story multiple times to different family members, including their children and their grandchildren. My mother said that at times when she wanted to swim in a lake or river with her friends, the story of that lake woman would be told to her as a type of deterrent, I guess. This experience was said to be her most terrifying memory next to World War II. She would always tell the children to swim in big groups and not to stray far when swimming in rivers and lakes. My grandmother would refer to the lake woman as Serena. But from hearing the story countless times, I came to a conclusion that the thing she encountered that day might have been a sea witch or an evil spirit. Older folks in the province would say that these spirits or creatures like to be somewhere quiet and isolated. And it'd be best to actually not acknowledge their presence. Story about the devil and shadow figures which happened to me. Hello. Before I start with my story, I first want to inform you that English is my 3rd language, and I can make some grammar errors even when we live in this era of Google and autocorrects. I first want to say that I am your fan for some time now, and I really like that you interact with your viewers. It's nice to see YouTubers who do this. Fast info about me. I'm a male YouTuber from Lithuania who goes by the name Prufux. Okay, enough of the chit-chat, let's go right to the story. Devil and the shadow figures, or as I like to call them, shadow people. Now, for the longest time in my life, I used to call myself the devil because I was a really heavy child. When I hit the teen years, I kinda had a sexy face for a guy. It's not my judgment, but girls from my school and in that city say that. So, I started to call myself devil about 5 to 6 years ago, and most of the people around me started to react as if it was my middle name or something, and sometimes added, "Look, he is a devil in the sheep's body." And of course, I got really used to that. I say all of this because it'll make everything much more simple to understand. So, the main story. I know, my storytelling sucks. Okay. A few years ago, when I first moved out of my parents to live on my own ass, I started to see dark figures in the end of my hall or near the window in the corner. At first, I just brushed it off because my eyesight was bad and I was about to get my first pair of glasses. But once I got the glasses and came home, in my head I said, well, the devil's back in his cave. After this thought, however, the apartment got a bit cold. But the weird thing was, the cold feeling was the same as in the places where they hold dead bodies. The feeling was really scary, and I remember that the next week or two, I was in my place with all the lights lit at all times, even when I went to sleep. Yeah, I know, grown-ass man sleeps with lights. Well, not man, but a 21-year-old guy. Well, I stopped calling myself Devil, and just as suddenly, the weird cold feeling went away. Also, the shadow people got a bit blurry and came to visit me not so often as they used to. But I still see them even now when I'm running you in my office at this moment. I see one in the corner. I am now 23 years old, and I just bought myself my own flat. The reason why I mention all of this to you is because yesterday I came home. It was after the housewarming parties and so on. Finally, I am alone in my home. I stare at the ceiling at this point and loudly say with a smile, well, as a devil, I made a nice job with my life. After I said this, I felt my feet getting cold and started hearing really scary and weird noises, like they were like the ones from Harry Potter when he talks to snakes, but makes the noise a bit lower in tone and more demonic, like almost growling, but still like snakes hissing. I shit you not, I almost pissed myself from the fear. I start to look left and right. The sweat on my body came out like a shower. When my glance stopped in the corner near my window, I heard click, and the lights went off. I know that I am alone home and that there's no way someone would break in because I have safe doors with 2 locks and medals everywhere. Because I know there is no one who is alive except me, I still stare at that corner. And what happens next still sends heart pains to me now. As I'm staring into the corner, I feel a cold path in front of me. I mean, the signs were warm, but the path from the corner to me, ice cold. I heard the floor squeak one time, and then it hit me. Someone literally grabbed my heart with his cold hand and squeezed and whispered in my ear, "You are nothing but a worthless life form. You are not a devil. I am." After his last words, the lights came on, and all of a sudden, the coldness was gone. I just fell on the ground and cried for almost an hour thinking, what the fuck just happened? I think the shadow people which I see are the devil minions, and they are watching me if I am not living his life. If something will happen, I'll keep you updated. Potential fleshgate or stalker. Okay, I'll start this by saying I am a 20-year-old, 6'4" built male, and I live in England, about 50 miles away from London in the boonies, and I've had a fair share of interesting encounters that I'll get to in some other time. For the sake of being anonymous, I'll refer to myself as Ross. The encounter that I'll be talking about in this email is the most interesting one. It was a warm summer evening in the town that I live in, and Halloween was about a month away in the summer of 2013. Me and a few of my friends, Laura, Bert, and Henry, decided to go and make use of our tents in the local field near a small woodland. This was like a rite of passage for all students who graduate from secondary school or high school in my town. We go to the site at around 6:30 to 7 and set our 3 tents up by about 7:10 at night. As we wind down from a long day of studying and messing around, like the rebellious students that we were, Bert left to go for a piss in the fields. Classic Bert, I say, as I glance over to my friends, who are both in agreement, smirking with the typical joys of borrowing sitter from the parents' cabinet. Lauren then replied, giggling through her words, "Wouldn't have him any other way." As I glanced up to look over to see where Bert had gone, after waiting a few minutes to let the sitter sink in, I then see Bert sprinting towards our location of 3 small tents. We all stand up in slight shock, watching our friend barreling towards us. As we look behind him at the tree line, we noticed the dark figure stepping back into the trees. Henry and I probably got up staring at the tree line, whilst Laura ran up to intercept him. Not to say, the creature moved back into the trees. By this time, the sun is setting, and the perfect harvest moon is overhead. After a few sips of cider and a brief 5 minutes, Bert glances up at us, standing over him, looking worried. He then probably tells us that when he found the ideal place, as he puts it, to piss, he said he heard a strange noise coming from deeper in the woods. He said it was the most guttural sound he had ever heard in his life. And standing no more than 10 feet away from him, he said he could smell horrible, putrid odor lingering in the air. It was at that moment that he saw a humanoid figure slowly rising from the ground. It was at this point he decided to, and I quote, "run like a bitch." Seeing the visible shock in Bert's eyes, we decided to leave and head home in the sinister orange moonlight. At that moment, as I glanced back one more time, I could see the figure lingering at the foot of the woods, and I shouted, "Run!" as we left the field, leaving nothing behind. I am fortunate enough to say that we didn't see any more of whatever that creepy humanoid being was. And gladly, I'm assured that my friends haven't either. Four true ghost stories from my life. Hey, maybe you can use them all in one big episode for people who have reoccurring experiences. All these stories happened to me, they are all true. My first story takes place when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. I remember waking up in a cold sweat. I usually slept with my bedroom door open with the lights on in the hallways. And from where my bed was, I could see across the hall to my father's room. This night, I remember the hall lights were out, which was unusual, and I could see the full-bodied apparition of a woman in a nightgown floating in the doorframe of my father's bedroom. She was holding a baby to her shoulder, and her feet were invisible. Again, she was floating probably 1.5 feet off the ground. I couldn't move or look away, and after I had stared for a good 30 seconds, her head turned towards me. Just as her face would become visible, she faded away. I remember telling myself it was only the moonlight from a nearby window hitting the doorframe, but to the best of my memory, the moonlight never hit the top of the doorframe any other night before or after that night again. A few years later, I was living with my mother. She had bought a new house with her new husband. I remember thinking this new house was pretty awesome, and I was excited to explore a new house and really make it my own. The first night, however, I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was being watched from a corner of the ceiling. Then, a creature that looked like a salamander crawling from that corner and walking on the ceiling directly over my head. It was at that moment I suddenly experienced a pulling sensation from my stomach and saw my body and a look of pure terror on my face, which I can distinctly remember. This was not the only time I had an out-of-body experience in that house particularly. About 1 year later, I was alone in the house one summer afternoon. It was a very warm and bright day outside, but I was upstairs playing on my computer. I believe I was looking for porn, as I usually did when I was alone. And I heard footsteps on the stairs, and turned my head, expecting to see my mother or stepfather coming up to my room I was in. Instead, I felt myself being pulled from inside my stomach again, and saw myself staring in wonder from the computer room. I then saw the wall at the top of the stairs like I was no longer in the room, but standing on the landing halfway up. I felt my ghost body walking through the wall, and then felt the warm sunshine on my skin, and I was all out sprinting down the street. I felt my feet hitting the concrete sidewalk. I saw the houses go past me as I ran. I blinked uncontrollably, and then I was again sitting at the computer staring blankly at a white browser screen I pulled up to prevent whoever was coming up the stairs to see what I was doing. It felt like I'd been staring at it for minutes without moving. The next story I have happened to me my first year of college, about 11 years ago. I was renting the basement from an old lady with my best friend, and usually stayed up late at night talking with my then girlfriend on MSN. We had opened up both our webcams to see each other when all of a sudden, I felt a familiar feeling trickle down my spine. Generally, when I'd seen strange things, such as the stories I have previously mentioned, I had a tingle on my spine, and most people describe as someone walking on your grave. According to my ex, my head snapped to the left, and I was staring at a storage room, whose door had just opened. My roommate or I, never opened that door as it was just a small room packed with our landlady's old crap. I felt as if all the muscles in my body were being held down all at once. My girlfriend told me that the look of pure terror on my face scared her, and she'd been calling my name 5 or 10 times to try and get me to snap out of it before I finally came around and could move again. Now, this last story is more recent. I bought my first home with my wife 2 years ago, and I never really liked it, or felt attached to it because she was in love at first sight with it. When we were moving in and cleaning out the old carpets and junk that was left in the basement, we found drawings of demons with pitchforks scratched into the walls with red pencil crayon. A few months later, I was in the basement, searching the freezer for dinner. I picked something and grabbed a can of pop on my way back up to the main floor. When I got to the top of the stairs, I turned around to close the door behind me. I saw the surprised face of a man who had been following me up the stairs in silence. I dropped the can of pop, slammed the door, and leapt backwards away from the stairs, crashing into a wall. I saw this man as clearly as any other real person. But before you think there was a criminal or something invading my home, let me assure you that there was no one in my house other than me and my wife. To this day, I hear banging from the kitchen at odd hours. I see shadows and smell cigar smoke. I get chills whenever I go down into the basements, but my wife doesn't seem to have the problem, so perhaps I'm just the lucky one.